I guess I was thinking about a story I have. I had, in the morning, driving my 10-year-old daughter to school, and she said, "Dad, what is KFC? I know they sell chicken. What does KFC stand for?" I said, "Well, Kentucky Fried Chicken." "Why do they call it KFC?" I'm like, I don't know. I go to work, and I had just started working with Kevin on the executive committee for MOC division, and one of my colleagues said, "So David, what does MOC stand for?" So I think there's a metaphor or a story there that...
Wait, do we sell chicken?
No, we don't sell chicken.
Yes.
Not the moral of the story. Is making sure that, so one of the things I wanted to talk about is not forgetting the organization and the cognition together, right? So I'm really, this has been, for me personally, just very generative. I came into cognition via identity. And it took me several years to sort of think about identity as a particular theory of cognition, right? As I heard about all the other applications of cognition, it just didn't seem to fit with what I was doing. But over time, and as work goes along, you know, this is what we do. We're thinking about how people think, and then how they change their behavior, but always within an organization. So one of the things I think about, let's say future, but it's more about us, maybe a little navel gazing, is making sure that we apply cognition to organizational phenomena that's squarely rooted in organizations. So whether it's organizational cognition or cognition within organizations. If you find yourself talking about your study without invoking anything organizational, you might need to pause and go, what am I doing? If we're going to be talking about organizational cognition, if you're a cognitive psychologist and you're applying it broadly, great, that's wonderful. But it's organizational cognition. Second, forwards and backwards. So that, what's sort of neat is I had that written before I saw the title for your paper. But this idea of temporality within cognition, I think there's a big opportunity as broadly across organizational studies to think about temporal issues as it relates to cognition. Because if we're constructing who we are, we're constructing what's around us. Do we construct by looking backwards? Do we construct by looking forwards? How does that work? Maybe we all assume that it's sort of in situ, current, but it's temporal. Then two last things, more of areas that I think are fun to think about with cognition, is the idea was the future, I guess, of cognition. And this is, I'm assuming I'm very micro-meso, and we have folks that are very macro, so I looked at what I'm interested in. And this idea of relationships within organizations, something that for many years organizational scholars have somewhat ignored. They looked at the individual and they looked at the collective. But if you think about a relationship and relational-based cognitions, you know, if one person leaves a team and you have a team of 5, the team's still around. If you have a relationship, one person leaves the relationship's no longer. There's what's unique about the relationship at work and the cognitions and the dyadic level cognition. So it's not so much social cognition, which is using interpersonal information to figure out who I am and what I'm doing, what I think about my world, but what do we think as a relationship that then folds into the bigger we's around us. It gets a little complicated, but I think it's worth to think through those complex issues as to relationships. And lastly, just more of where my heart is around identity, is this sort of idea of identity work and identity construction. And this is more of a soapbox issue, but I'll just say it, is there has been so much interpretive great work on identity work. I think we're ready for a deductive approach. As I look at the literature, we're sort of rehashing the same findings with new inductive studies. And so if we're doing the same findings with new inductive studies, that might be a time for us to switch to a more functional deductive approach and looking at identity work from a deductive approach.
Thanks for that. So Anybody on the panel want to jump in? Or want to jump in the audience? Whoever shouts first gets to speak. Yeah, there we go.
I almost had a heart attack. I can't believe you said it's time to do deductive work and identity. Hallelujah. I hope you're right. What is your sense that those of us in the field are ready for this?
Well, I think there's plenty of people that are doing deductive work already. I think in 2001, which isn't that long ago when I started my PhD, there's deductive work in identification. So where the bifurcation is, identity is inductive, identification is deductive. So we have a measure, right? Whereas identity, as we get our heads around it, we're starting to see more and more variables and context for it. Then it's a harder road to hoe because identity is more content-based. So then you have to do a little bit more. You have to do a little qualitative. I won't say inductive, but a little qualitative work on the front end to get at what the identity is, to then
Do the deduction.
to do the deduction. But still, the process we can deduce ahead of time now. That's what I'm
going to take up 2 and 7. Do you think there's one particular deductive question you would like to see explored?
Yeah, if I told you, I'd have to shoot you.
Okay.
No, I actually say that as a joke. I mean, I have multiple ones. I think it's more application of it. So right now I'm really intrigued with leadership development. And this, I see that from a cognition standpoint, think about leadership development. It's metacognition, shared cognition, collective cognition, could be relational shared cognition, right? All those things happening within leadership development, right? So you have a leader that needs to be self-aware. You have a group of leaders that are getting trained together how to be leaders, coming up with strategy. You have mentors with leaders getting developed. That's just this amazing context for cognition to be. So.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in?
Good. Just on that topic, I think it's interesting because, if you look at some of the stuff that's being done on categories now in organizational theory, it's all deductive, and it's a different kind of research tradition on identities, but it's there. And also the literature in social psychology on social identity is experimental and deductive. So maybe the Albert Wetton tradition of identity has been more inductive.
Well, and specifically identity work is where I was going. This idea of
Identity
individual,
work.
Identity construction, where it's about narrative. So it from the beginning, it lends itself to inductive. But the process depends where you're from. The process that's come up with now, I think, is we can start testing a little bit more.
Identity work.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to move on because I'm not going to hold here, and we'll come back to the conversation, I'm sure, because I know there are going to be other comments that link to methods as well in there. So I'm going to move to Kevin.
Thank you, and I also had a couple of things that actually tie in quite well to David, but I do have to tell, since of what he said, I have to tell one funny story. The paper that Mike Pratt and I published back in 2006 on professional identity construction, we were told, actually, prior to AMJ, that there was too much inductive work on identity, and that was when that paper got rejected from ASQ. The funny part is that the editor of that paper happened to be Joe Porac. So, Mike and I actually have a funny running joke that it was actually a very good letter. It was only 1 or 2 lines in the paper about how much inductive work there had been on identity, and it was really time to sort of move on. And that, I don't know what it was, maybe 2003, 2004. But while we did not agree with Joe at the time, and we did eventually take his picture down from the dartboard in the office, and have actually come to see that point and David's point, and I completely agree. And I actually come to this panel as somebody who reviews a lot of qualitative work, for better or for worse. And that is something that I find myself saying a lot, and the associate editors and the editors that I work with say quite a bit, is there's a lot of interesting data out there, but a lot of the data is retelling stories that we already know. And you know, one of the problems that we see, and that I definitely see, and one of the things I wanted to mention is that as we're looking to do work on cognition, one of the things that is really helpful is to be grounded in an organizational phenomenon. David mentioned phenomenon. I'll actually use the word problem. But if you have an organizational problem, that gives you a venue for actually looking at that problem and trying to solve that problem. It could be that we have no theory that we can use to solve that problem, which might lend itself to an inductive approach. But a lot of times, we do have theory and especially with regard to identity work, identity construction, we actually have quite a bit of theory. And if there is a problem that you see in an organization, you know, not only does it give you a touchstone for linking back to the organizational issues as David talked about, but maybe it takes you down a more deductive path. Because unfortunately what happens quite a bit is we get a great research site, we go and collect a ton of data, and lo and behold, we find things like equity theory works. Cool, it's great. I mean, now I have 200 interviews that basically prove that people compare themselves to each other and they're not happy, you know, when they don't get pay increases. And you know, and that's part of sort of the bane of qualitative research, is that it is risky in that we don't necessarily know if we're going to find something new. But a lot of times, based on if we start with a problem in the organization, we can make good educated guesses about what we're likely to find and what we're not likely to find. So that's sort of my first recommendation, is to really be focused on that problem. How do you diagnose that? Well, you can even look at your slides if you're presenting here, or as you sort of talk about your work in the recent past or over the next few months. Are you starting with a problem? Like, are you starting with an example about something that you're trying to solve in organizations? Or are you starting with, nobody has looked at this construct and this construct? Because sometimes when you get into the business of constructs and variables and moderations and so forth, we lose sight of the bigger picture, as David mentioned quite well, which is we want to link back to organizations, not only because we want to keep that as part of our research, but also we want to make our research accessible. We want to be able to tell the story of our research, and we should be able to tell that story in a very few words, whether that's in a classroom, whether that's to a company where we're doing data collection, or whether that's to other researchers. So that's an easy way to sort of diagnose where you are and how you're sort of doing linking your own research back to organizations. Second thing that I see a lot, and it is a challenge, is because of sort of our basis of knowledge, I think a lot of our tendency is to build longitudinal theory. We want to build process models. We want to build, we want to look over time. We want to look at identity construction, which is a lot of what I read and look at. We want to look at how sense-making leads to organizational outcomes, or how socialization practices via identity lead to certain outcomes, or whatever the process model is. It's very difficult to develop longitudinal theory with cross-sectional data. Just because you have 50 interviews or 75 interviews or 100 interviews, if all of those interviews are at one point in time, or you only talk to everybody once, not that it's impossible, but it's very hard to see the change. And a lot of where there is room for inductive work is in change. How things progress over time, how people change their cognitions, how they're thinking of themselves and their collectives and their relationships. And to do that, it does take more work. But it's easier to know that going in and plan on that as you're going into data collection. versus on the back end doing all these interviews and then realizing, oh, I really want to build this longitudinal theory, and then realizing I only have this one set of data. And even though people might be at different stages of that model, does not make it longitudinal data. You really want to see how people are changing over time. That's definitely something that I've seen in the field. And the third one, and I will, well, I see this a lot. This actually came up, Dan Forbes mentioned this yesterday, and so I will steal it from him, is linking back to focused on organizational problems. We tend to be too caught up in construct proliferation, right? And coming up with our own constructs. I actually came up, I jotted down a short list, and this is from memory, so I'm going to get these wrong. And some of these are actually in the press, so this is not that these are good or bad, or there's no value judgment on these. But I've seen identity elasticity, identity repudiation, identity affirmation, identity clarity, identity anchors, identity resources, identity information, identity archetypes, identity supports, identity constraints, and it goes on and on. And some of those might be quite good. Some might be redundant with earlier terms. But that's not our goal. Like even though relational identification is very, very good, and David's been very successful coming up with that idea. I think that's very tough to do. And so as David used the word application or usefulness. You don't necessarily have to come up with a new construct. It could be that you're thinking about existing constructs in a new way, or looking at sort of a unique problem and using some of the existing constructs. I actually think that can make quite novel and interesting contributions. I'll leave you with one study that I think is quite interesting. This is a study that's in press at AMJ. And what I like about this study, this is actually a study of and you can look in the impress section. The authors, I wrote them down so I remember. It's Terence Stanko and Christine Beckman. This is a study on boundary control in the Navy. And what they found is that the Navy, on their submarine ships, they had a problem. Does anybody know this article? You guys don't know this? Okay, so the problem in this that the Navy had is that these submarine officers were being allowed to use the internet. And they would communicate with home, and that would make them feel worse about their jobs. And so you have this tension amongst the senior staff in the organization, which is, we want our sailors to feel connected to home because that's an important part of their lives. But we also don't want them to share any secrets. And we don't want them to sort of ruminate about how bad their life is on the submarine and so forth. And in talking with the organization, at least I'm assuming in talking with the organization, these researchers discovered this problem and designed a study to test that problem. Yes, identity was part of it, so was technology, so was boundary issues. But that whole study is focused on that organizational problem and trying to understand what is going on there and how the organization might solve that. So if you're looking for sort of one good example of an article to look at, like I said, I think that's in the Impress section at AMJ. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So who wants to jump in?
Can I say something real quick? So I'm not the video that killed the radio star in the sense of the inductive, deductive.
Very offensive.
Is as if you're sitting there and saying, well, I love doing inductive work, and I love this particular question. I guess what I'm saying is there's still lots of questions to be asked and answered via inductive work. So move to those, right? You can think about a new problem, a new context, a new application. But in the sense of, this particular specific topic around identity construction, I think that's where I'm talking about moving deductive.
And the sense of why you got, or why we're stuck there, or why we fell there. Is it a cultural thing among the community, or? And I don't.
I don't know whether it's I don't know, maybe very specific to this particular stream. A lot of people started doing projects around the same time. I think we're all a tight community, we all know each other pretty well, we share ideas, and so all of a sudden, you know, but sort of came in waves if you look at the data. The articles are.
So we need to press the frontier, and I know somebody's
Yeah.
going to talk about that a little bit later on before we wrap up. Joe, you want to
Yeah, just a kind of comment about, I'm struck by the overall issue around research approach. So how do you pick a research topic? How do you decide whether to be inductive or deductive, to be field-based or theory-based? And I think that one issue, the phrase that, you know, if you start with the theory first, you can lose the big picture. I think probably the same could be said about starting anywhere, losing the big picture, but I think a lot of our theories are too small. You know, we have a lot of, and that's part of the proliferation of constructs that we are rewarded for finding a new term and defining it and explaining something about it and then throwing it in the literature, and then we have dozens and dozens of overlapping terms. With synthesis is not common, and I think one of the advantages of the field is that it can, if you have a problem that people really care about, it forces a kind of synthesis on you, and maybe that's a more effective heuristic for researchers than grand theory forcing a heuristic. But I do have a kind of lurking concern back there that I'm thinking about, that our theories just aren't, you know, we tend to create a little box to work a paper in without thinking about how that box connects to a broader set. You know, we're good at reviewing the literature for exactly that, but less good at reviewing the broader set of literatures for how this, is this really a contribution or a rephrasing or finding the same, you know, is it old wine in new bottle or what?
And what you're saying, Stan, are we worse at that as a community, or is this a function of a broader disease in terms of the way we drive
It's certainly not unique to MOC. It's not our disease.
Yeah, okay. So this is an issue that maybe we can solve it because we're a smaller community. Maybe we can do something. Yeah.
Well, I think there's commenting on those astute observation. There's very little normal science. What constitutes normal science? There's a lot of theory development, hence the proliferation of terms, because this is what people are looking for. And there's been, I don't know how many people have been following what's been happening in social psychology over the last 2 or 3 years, but after a few very public embarrassment retractions of what was supposed to be building blocks of the field, there's been a lot of introspection in social psychology and some concrete initiatives to change the field from somewhere where you get rewarded for flashy findings to a more steady, slow, normal science kind of discipline. So for instance, journals started to publish replications, which was unheard of before that. This also, once you have to publish replications, then you don't need to come with a flashy new term. You just say, hey, no, we thought it works here, it also works here. And that's a publishable finding. So about fixing the world starting here, one thing that I saw in this conference that I was really happy to see is that in at least 2 presentations, the presenters had null results. And yet somebody accepted this paper and they went on stage and presented it, and speaking about negative knowledge, knowing what doesn't work can be also very valuable.
Yeah, and I actually think I completely agree with you, Shane. And one of the things that I'd like to see more of is individuals that have really compelling case studies, that we have more outlets for that work. Because if you're going to go into the field and you're going to gather data, and most of the qualitative work that we see, it's in one organization or maybe 2 organizations, it would be nice to know that as long as you are doing all that work, that there will be a respectable place to see that work. Because a lot of time what we see is we see a case study that's a very solid case study that summarizes well all of the things that are going on in this organization, but there's not really new theory. that article gets rejected, and might have been rejected as well, and then what do you do? Do you throw that in a drawer? Well, that's actually very useful knowledge for somebody else and for the field. And I think that's one of the ideas behind this new Academy Journal, Discoveries. Pete and I were just talking about this, that you have a place to go that for work that maybe doesn't have as strong of a theoretical contribution, but raises a lot of questions and is a very interesting data set. We'll see how that shakes out. This is only the first year, but I hope there are more avenues for that. And I too was encouraged by some of the null findings here.
Great stuff. Okay, so, and I think Christian will have a little half announcement tomorrow or something that we're working on to help with that dissemination of some stuff as well. So we'll tease you with that one until tomorrow. And I'll move over to Joe.
Okay, so I'm sitting here thinking, I think this is the 25th year anniversary of the MOC.
Close.
Because 1989 was the meeting in Washington that kind of then spurred the formal application to the Academy Management to become an interest group. And if it happened in 1990, it would be the 25th year anniversary.
Yeah, I know the first scholar I believe was 92, and I think that was Carl. So,
But it took a year.
It took a year. It took a year for that to happen. So that's probably right. We should be throwing a party.
It's worth thinking about. So it's either this year or next year that there's going to be a 25th year.
Yeah.
The reason I'm thinking about this is because my message is that it's the most exciting time to be an MOCer than in the whole 25-year history of the interest group / division, because I think that first of all, there is whatever cognitive turn was around in 1989 has turned around and has developed and blossomed, and so cognition is kind of a fundamental problem. It's in so many different social sciences and sciences. So the whole cognitive phenomenon is rich in there. Although one wonders, Don Palmer was saying once that it's like the 1970s. Everybody, beards were interesting for a while, but then everybody started wearing a beard. And then you kind of say, well, maybe it's time to shave. I don't know whether just the proliferation of cognition research suggests maybe that there's going to be another turn away. But right now, I think it's just tremendous. And I think part of the methodological issues that we're talking about here is that, I think, and you can see it here in this couple of days, that we now have access to all kinds of different methodologies, and that are considered to be legitimate ways of fleshing out explanatory principles in cognition research. So Dirk, is doing some really interesting stuff in simulations. That work had not even been around in 1989 when we started. So we started kind of more sort of people studying more inductive, case-based kinds of work, and but now we have experiments. You have organizational colleges doing experiments. That's an interesting phenomenon. And when you have qualitative researchers doing simulations in order to test their ideas from grounded work, that's interesting as well as people were doing that. So I think we've become very methodologically eclectic. And I'll go on record, I said this at the Diamond in the Rough 2 years ago, I'll go on record saying that it's going to be increasingly difficult to publish any paper with one method of investigation unless you're replicating that several times in different populations or something, you're teasing it out. So what you're going to find, I think you're already seeing it, case studies that are accompanied with a survey or an experiment or a simulation that is the base, but then you have addition onto that a case study or an analytical model that's accompanied with an experiment. And I think that's what's going to happen, and I think everybody has to kind of become a little bit more methodologically eclectic. And perhaps I think also what you're seeing is, people maybe are this would be an empirical question, have co-authorships increased in frequency, and have co-author lists increased in length because of this problem, which is this development. So we're all looking for ways of kind of juxtaposing different methodologies, and we're expert in some things, maybe not in others. So it's an exciting time, I think. Fantastic time to be an MOC. That's one thought that comes about, and another thought, I kind of attended to it a little bit yesterday in my talk, and something that it's just kind of a personal observation from my own corner of the MOC world, but I really think that people, for the last 50, 60 years, cognition research in organizations has been disciplined by a perspective that was built in the 1940s and 50s at the Carnegie School, and the whole bounded rationality kind of thing, and so on. And I really think that people are looking for, not to replace it, but to supplement it with something else, because that perspective starts to strain when you start getting into questions of innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, change, and disruptive change, for example. And there are attempts to kind of try to patch things up. But I think that inherently, when you start to assume that the world is open-ended, as opposed to the world is out there and we've got to understand it, as opposed to the world is not out there and we've got to create it, I think that there is another set of principles, and you see it at all kinds of different levels. For example, you see with Jay Barney writing a paper in entrepreneurship on the opportunity discovery versus opportunity creation. You see it in innovation research that's sort of talking about conceptual combination. Or you see it with the huge headway that design theory is starting to make in management theory, and management research. Maybe even more so in management practice, that the managers are searching for something. So I think that's a set of open questions, a zeitgeist that might be waiting to happen or not is in the early stages or so on, that is a gap, a development, something new to think about.
And I'm linking this back to John's comment about our theories aren't big enough. Is it that our ideas aren't big enough, or we have big ideas but we're not getting to lay them down?
Yeah. Don't know.
Anybody?
Yep.
There's a feature topic in organizational research methods on mixed methods. And there's the 3 different approaches to mixed methods and at stages of the project. So before you design it, when you need to bring someone on, is it a philosophy of science? Are you a mixed methods researcher, or do you need to learn 2 methods to put them together? I think it's due next year. They finished collecting all the invited submissions in January, so they're all under peer review already. So it's either the end of this year or early next year in ORM.
Anybody else?
I was just thinking, just to concur with Joe's point, when I think about just how fundamental that shift would have to even be, I laugh when I just even look at some of the older research on Big Factor 5 and everything we know about creativity, and still calling one factor neuroticism when it has such a strong link to creativity, and the idea that already some researchers are calling it emotional sensitivity or reframing it in a different way. Where when it was first formulated, it was, this is aberrant behavior that belongs in a box away from us. Because it doesn't produce widgets or anything like that we want to just roll out on the assembly line. And geez, we're talking about the Big Factor 5. It's just, that's so fundamental to so much of what we do. But there alone, to your point, we have to maybe start reframing just some of these, underpinnings to how we can make these things.
So Kevin, I think we should have a party for 25th year anniversary. I also think, from this couple of days here, I think that it would be wonderful to have a conference, and MOC would be the perfect place, a conference on identity that invites all the folks from micro, meso, macro to present their work. I think because it's very clear to me that there are lots of little pockets that aren't talking to one another. And it would be a really interesting venue. I think that's a really interesting gap, because I think every paper today or yesterday was on identity in some sort, but.
Peter, did you want to come in there?
Well, I just had a thought that we should do a longitudinal case study of the implementation and diffusion of experimental design by organizational ecologists. And how that affected their identity work.
It's true. I mean, it's really interesting.
Okay, and I'm gonna move quickly to Anna this, because Anna wants to talk about identity in some part of her piece, but she actually wants to talk about our identity in that. So identity seems to have been the connecting theme.
Yeah, very good.
So well done, and straight out of that.
So I would start with what a pleasure it is to be at this size of conference and to be in this place. This is a good time to say thank you to
Yeah.
Ms. Jen.
And to the team back there.
And the whole team,
Holding it all together.
and all the people from here did the buses, et cetera. It's a pleasure to be in a conference where everybody thinks it's normal and wonderful, to look at what you think is normal and wonderful, and you have that same feeling all the time. And I was impressed with kind of a fluidity with dealing with concepts like attention and identity, et cetera, that were more difficult in the time past. I'm impressed with how international the conference is, and definitely this change in methods. So I see experiment and more quantitative work and simulation and so on as becoming more the new norm, and all of those things I think are real progress. But I took this thing about frontiers as being really serious, so I want to talk about some places where I see it not happening, and I'm not sure if it can happen. So several things worry me. One is this idea of being international. So a couple of years ago, I was at an EQUIS meeting. You got to remember, this is the European Quality Management whatever, and there was the dean of the School of Business in Nairobi, and he was saying, I want my faculty to publish in international journals. And as they say in Ireland, grand, good idea. And then his idea was, you should go out to the Maori and take the theories of governance and see how it's working. And I'm saying, not grand. I don't think that's a good idea. It's a possible thing to do, but it's not what I would think is the first thing to do. And I worry that as we're in a world where there's so much attention to the top journals and the kind of theories that are accepted and so on, that we are potentially narrowing what we might look at in new places. And that we are self-monitoring ourselves to perhaps use things that we know from where we are, but may not fit so much as where we're trying to go and what we can potentially see there. A thing that I've been really interested in recently is Airbnb. So when I started out thinking Airbnb, I thought that was you take an airplane to a place and you get an Airbnb. That's not it. It was only 8 years ago. It was started in San Francisco. Some kids were interested in a design conference. It's very expensive to get a room. There were people who didn't have a room, and they thought to themselves, who has an air mattress? We can find this out. 8 years later, at the beginning of this year, they had 1 million rooms in 190 countries, and Intercontinental, which is the largest hotel group, had something like 675,000. It is an extraordinary change in the way the world has worked. And it's a change that has come about in large part because of social media and this kind of social interaction. So there's a wonderful TED Talk by a woman who talks about somebody that was an Airbnb host, wakes up one morning, and he has all sorts of emails. Are you okay? I heard that there was a riot in London. 13 former guests contacted him by email to find out if he was okay, he says, before his own mother happened to find out if he was okay. This world, this kind of really interconnected world, is one that I'm not sure we're kind of connecting to. If you think about ISIS and what ISIS is doing and how hard it is for people to outside to understand, I can think of some of the theories that work, but I don't think they really attach so well to what ISIS sees itself doing, or the Kurds see themselves as doing. We're behind the frame on this, I think. We really don't have a good way to think about this big changes that are happening, and what strategists, which is my field, what strategists are doing to invent new ways of acting. So I worry that we might be looking at things that, well, I want to make sure that some of us are looking at those things. I think it's really important. A way to do that, I think, is to not talk so much to ourselves, even though this is fun. So I'm an author on a paper that I didn't choose the title of, but I'm sticking with it. It's called Shades of Gray. It's about it's about using the gray literature, using gray material. And I think that that's a place to figure out how the world is changing. The argument in the paper is we can't, if we want to, not only just the data that we use, and I was pleased to see Twitter used in one of the papers that I listened to this time, but it's not just in the data we use, but in how we frame our studies. It's important to think about what people are thinking in the world, where things are happening in the gray literature, and gray material, like videos and so on. So there are some frontiers, I think, that I worry that we're going to have to climb on top of what we're doing now and really find some new ways to do things if we want to, and some of us, I hope, do, want to engage in this changing world.
So we're looking for the Airbnb of the MOC world.
You know, I have a great video. It shows a shell. This is in Chile, I believe. You can rent a shell, a kind of a house. I'm sure I cannot afford it. You can do a bus in Sonoma County, truly a bus, no running water, no whatever. The range of things that are available is phenomenal.
Yeah, well, they are indeed. And I mean, it's one of the things that struck me is that we have. In the way we do our literature and our dissemination is that we have held on to the grand hotels. And that at what point does that start to come unstuck? I mean, I think part of the issue is that as we tried to go open in some way towards it, we ended up with predatory organisations actually moving into the States with illegality in terms of trying to capture money from an audience, and that actually has become our work in the industry that I think we haven't sorted out. I'm not sure who the white knights that are going to create the Airbnb are, but it is a question that's in my mind around what will happen to the grand hotels of management literature in the decades to come. I doubt they'll look the same if we come back in 20 years' time to it. But let me throw it open again for comments or questions or challenges. Yep.
Yeah. Don't forget to send your email, because that's what I'm doing. Strategic cognition of social media, so I've been working with that for the past 3 years. And something is going on, but you're right. And there is definitely a need for new approaches. But again, then we should sort of practice what we preach. We talk about experiential approaches, we talk about creativity and so on. So perhaps it's also a question of being more tolerant and doing more experiments, not necessarily expecting a certain outcome. And I think that's also necessary, talking about the mission, the overall mission of what we have to do. Now, I heard on the radio about the sustainability problems, the climate changes. I said now we've been talking to biologists, economists and so on. Now we need to have the psychologists and the cognition people to change people's understandings and minds of what is going on. So I think we have a larger mission than we actually think we have. So there's a lot of work for us to do on the global scale.
Well, if it's accepted, it's going to be a Creative Commons. And if my colleagues agree, I can send you the submitted copies. So I'll be glad to do that.
Pushing boundaries.
Well, but can I just say one thing? If you're interested in Internet of Things, don't even go to an engineer. Go to Dell, the people who are really doing it.
I don't quite know what that means, so.
It means that as you walk by, I can figure out what you paid for your shirt, where you bought it, what's in your pocket, what your money is. It's things that are connected to,
Okay, now I'm getting scared, so stop.
That's what we deal with in marketing.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
What your passport number is, no problem.
Yeah.
leave it
You're
alone.
scanned all the way through.
You know what, this doesn't work.
Okay, so before I get terrified of it to the end, any other comments that won't frighten me?
So let me just push back though a little bit. I mean, is it, do we need new theories to study that, to explain that, or is that just new data?
I guess we need both, because what I've seen is very often that, at least on the existing social media research, that old theories are applied, but they are cognized in the old way. So for instance, when you study interaction on social media, you assume the same things as you do with a face-to-face interaction. So there are lots of things that are transferred. Also, for instance, studies on virtual teams automatically transferred to social media research. But there is a difference. And that's the problem. If we don't question, is this actually the same? Then we will not get any further.
But what, so why not old organizational theories of design, differentiation, integration, or coordination issues, and so on? What doesn't apply?
I don't say that it necessarily doesn't apply, but I think we should be very attentive to the question, how can we be certain that this applies? So be more reflective
I
when
mean,
we
I can
work
see
with it.
where, for example, that the Internet of Things and social media and the interconnectedness of the world now raises the question of privacy much more so than it ever had, that it's ever been raised before. And that we start to realize that our understanding of privacy is very incomplete. And we don't have a really good theory of privacy.
Or organization as a concept. What is organization in Airbnb, in Uber, in Zipcar, all these sharing economy examples that we're getting to know?
See, I think you can use the word you like, but, and that you know, and you can think about what privacy is, but if you're in the Maori, you're talking about privacy, that word and your understanding of it is probably not right. And to have, so the theories that we use are glasses that help us see things, but they also keep us from seeing things. So,
A way of seeing is not seeing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about what we're about if you think about social construction.
Yeah.
So if,
True.
as researchers, if we continue, just sort of thinking about this point, if we
True.
continue to apply the old theories, do we actually in the end change the phenomenon
True.
long term? That might be a little bit far-fetched to think about it, but do we actually constrain what actually happens in reality? Because how we reported and started teaching it to the generations of students that come through our classrooms change the actual. So I started thinking about relationships, and the fundamental rules it seems like that my 15-year-old daughter uses to create relationships, totally different, seemingly, than the rules I used to create relationships. What are you doing? I'm texting this girl that I met one time at a conference, and we do Instagram and text, and they're almost best friends. Whoa.
And I'm doing my homework.
Yeah, and also trying to do the chores and other things, but that's a different issue as a parent. But so as we think about all this newness, I think it's a good balance, making sure that we're not constraining ourselves to just try to shoehorn in old theories, not old theories that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really
Please
good-
push back.
Well, no, I think that's a good example, but, if we look at like how we're forming relationships, and I don't think it's true just for 15-year-olds, I think that's actually true in organizations as well, that, the next generation is using different tools, but you also have the fundamental needs might be the same, right? Need for inclusion, need to belong, the effects of anonymity when you're using the sort of de-individuated communication. social identity needs. I mean, a lot of the same fundamental psychology is there. How it's being played out is different. And I think maybe the trap we occasionally fall into is saying, oh, no, these are different fundamental mechanisms. Well, actually, they might be quite the same, but the tools that she has and how she's expressing that might provide us a brand new context by which to study what, or further our understanding of some of those fundamental mechanisms.
I think one of the things, and I was struck that it wasn't in much of the conversation over the couple of days, is a shift from organisations with a clear sense of boundary to a sense of organisation as more about community. And I think this is one of the movements that I've seen with social media and the language that a younger generation, my son uses the term friend in a way that I would never use it, and friend means maybe somebody I met once, or maybe not even met them once, but we connect on the internet, and it is that sense of we're part of a bigger community, and it's much more fluid, and the boundaries are less clear, and they move in and out of that with identities in ways that maybe we didn't do in the past. I don't think it changes the fundamentals, but my God, it does actually change the way
Well,
they manage.
I just wonder, I was actually thinking the opposite. I wonder if because the idea of a boundary is so important, for example, for identity theory, whether that changes some fundamental things that are happening with an identity. Yeah. Right? So it changes how we think about it.
In Airbnb is a kind of lifestyle claim that I think is somewhat new. In ISIS, it's a kind of ideological appeal. I think that we had a marriage referendum in Ireland. It's astonishing. This country was the first to have a public election, a public vote on this, and it won by an enormous amount. And the way that it was done was very impressive. It was all about stay on message. It was yes. It was support the people that you know around you. It was astonishing. And so I guess I want some of this wonder about how the world, there's an industry publication that says, we're in trouble, Airbnb and the others like it are gradually bleeding away, siphoning away the millennials, et cetera. And I'm thinking, no, this is hemorrhaging. And it's a much bigger change in the world than you can think of if you're Hilton. And really, you don't have a very good base to work from. And as the things they've tried don't work very well.
But again, they use the links. They think this is an alternative to a hotel. But I had a colleague, we were on a conference in Belgium, and the host, she was there. She was sleeping on the couch, and he was sleeping in her bed. And when he came home from the conference, and she came home from work, they had a beer, there was beer in the fridge, and they had a conversation. They didn't know each other. And no hotels offer that kind of service. So it just shows that you have to reframe or understand it. He's a married man and nothing happened. You look good. Did you look good? How did you look? And so it's just an example of we really need to rethink.
Yeah, and I think there is a sense of some of those things that we've, and there's a generational piece of this as well, that we've got used to the idea of a hotel, but there is a group that are coming through now that this is just the way you do things. I mean, why would you go to one place to look for something when you can go to your network, when you can go to your platform where you have all this variety? And then, my daughter explains this to my wife, and she nearly runs out of the room in terror at the same, at that idea. So they're very different in how they're playing out. I think there's another interesting one on the way in Europe, which is the UK's engagement with Europe and what that means in terms of connection. And it's playing out in interesting ways within the institutions within the EU, which are strange beings anyway, which are of their nation states. And not necessarily of the EU, but yet have an identity that is an institutional one as well. And this is creating all sorts of really interesting challenges for those people who work in those institutions, who see themselves as having a nation position, who see themselves as a connection with Europe, whatever that is. And then this public row that we still haven't found out what it is about yet. That's starting to get played out on the outside. So I think there's great big experiments out there.
But it is about cognition. Cognition is at the heart of it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Oh, sorry, were you pointing at it? I haven't been, I've been a member of the MOC division for maybe at least 10 years, but I never, and I've gone to a couple sessions at the main conference, but I haven't really been interacting very much. But what I came here to look for, I was really wanting to hear more about the micro level, micro foundations, individual cognition, like what is the alternative to the boundary rationality frame, and how do we explain innovation? You know, what is the mental process of those people who are coming up with innovations? I've heard terms like entrepreneurial cognition, but I really don't know what it means. It's just like, is there an inclination to go and start a business? But what is it really that's going on? So I think that would be great if we could have like the group level, but also go back and, you know, what's the other way of explaining, or are there other alternative ways of explaining mental processes versus, you know, limiting your search to local alternatives and not projecting future and doing that. So I hope that people want to start looking at that more.
Yeah, we've actually seen quite a big increase, not at this conference, but at the main conference, and people studying intuition and non-rational or non-conscious processes. There's actually been quite an uptick in that, both symposium paper over the last few years. So there definitely are people that are going that route.
Yeah,
but that's the short
that
term. I actually think, I think the long term, you're going to see more collaborations with the neuroscientists and the neuropsychologists as we start to figure out what do we know about cognition in organizations, what do the psychologists know about cognitive psychology, and what do the neuroscientists know about how the brain works. We are all studying some of the same fundamental processes. In fact, at our MBA dinner, which was our graduation dinner last week, I was talking with one of our MBAs. He introduced his girlfriend. His girlfriend is a cognitive psychologist, a neuropsychologist who's using our fMRI machine at Mason to study how individuals are making intuitive decisions. And of course, we then talked for 20 minutes, completely ignoring the MBA, which I felt kind of bad about. But you know, it was so thrilling to talk to somebody who had no idea about, you know, Epstein's work and some of the other dual process work, but yet was studying the same fundamental questions that I had been studying in prior research with regard to how people are sorting information and bringing information into their schema and making decisions. With our ability to communicate and collaborate, and sort of the drying up of some of the grant money and so forth, I think these collaborations almost need to happen, and I think that's probably, you know, good for the field.
I would add to that, I don't think that you can explain the mind by just looking at the brain or patterns or how the chemicals move. And I would hope that, you know, there will be collaborations with epistemologists, you know, philosophers, because they also explain the mind.
Absolutely.
And you know, there's one way of looking at cognitive psychology, but there's also, you know, the philosophy of the mind. It's quite interesting.
Okay, I'm going to bring it to a close now. Kristen is standing there, and we're there. I think I'm going to go with the closing comment, which was Joe's, which was, isn't this a really exciting time to be involved in management and organizational cognition?
Let's have a party.
And let's have a party to celebrate that.
Well, actually, I will mention, we will have a pretty big party at Academy, and we will verify the 25-year thing, make sure Joe's right, and we'll definitely celebrate that Saturday. If you're going to be in Vancouver, we have a great MOC party on Saturday, hosted by David, please come.
Let me make a comment about that. So in the past, we've always had two. We've had sort of the Think About It social. We've had a business meeting thingy social whatchamajigger on Monday. And so sort of to serve and to get more people, we're combining that into one thing on Saturday. And we see that as a really great, so come on Saturday. That way you can be together with the whole community. We'll do some of the business meeting stuff there, but really is to be able to connect with the community scholars. And
our distinguished scholar this year, if you haven't looked at the program, is Kathy Sutcliffe. And Kathy will give her talk on the field. We've had actually great talks the last several years. And it's another time to come and hear about, how one of our eminent scholars sort of sees the field in the future. That's Monday morning at Academy. So hopefully see you all.
Okay, can we say thank you to the panel?